Wisconsin Eye is at the executive residence talking to Governor Scott Walker about what had to be an incredibly interesting and challenging year. In fact, that's my first question.
Yeah.
Describe in one word your first year in office. Just one word, sir.
Surreal.
Surreal? Why did you pick surreal?
Well, I mean, I knew, having seen me in the past, first in the Capitol and then as the county executive, that anytime you take on the status quo on anything, there's going to be some pushback. But I had no idea the kind of national attention, the kind of national focus this would get. I mean, we literally looked at it and said, like a small business owner would, here's a problem, here's a solution, well, let's just go out and fix it. Had no idea the kind of attention it would get. And it is what it is, and now we try to move the state forward.
Best day as governor?
Oh, some people might say, well, the day you signed the budget or budget repair bill itself. But I think any day, and I don't know if it was any single day, but any day I could be in one of the more enjoyable parts of my job, and that's at welcome home ceremonies for people from the National Guard. See those guys come home, to see their families and friends and loved ones, there's nothing better than that. And it really reminds you about, we talk about standing up and fighting for things. They're literally fighting for it and putting their lives on the line. So it's pretty remarkable.
Toughest day?
Toughest in the same regard. It's one of the things that's probably the most important thing I do, but without a doubt, toughest, excuse me, is actually going to military funeral, visiting with families before that. And what always, as tough as that is, it's also been very affirming because almost every one of those I've gone to, here I am with General Dunbar, we're reaching out, we're talking about the flags being flown at half staff, talking about praying for them and their families and that. Almost every one, a family member, mom, dad, uncle, somebody's pulled me aside and said, Governor, we're praying for you. We're praying for you and your family. And it just amazes me that someone in that kind of moment of sorrow would be thinking in that anything beyond just themselves and their own circumstance. And what it tells me, in the larger context, says about the people of the state of Wisconsin, is just the high quality, the kind of spirit of Wisconsin we see, whether it's there or reactions to tornadoes or natural disasters or all the other things I've seen firsthand around the state. Despite the talk about division in the Capitol and the Dome, people of the state are still pretty united, not about politics, not about policies, but about caring for each other, caring for their families, and even caring for their neighbors.
You mentioned the Capitol Dome. I was struck by a comment that was in a Wall Street Journal column. You said it's a good day for you to get up in Madison, have your private time, but then leave Madison on the Capitol. Can you explain that comment to me?
Well, it's a night and day difference. You get around the state, and again, I don't presume that people universally outside of the Capitol agree with me either, so that's not just a statement of policy, but people view things differently out there. You go to,
Governor Dreyfus was right?
Well, he was totally right. I mean, I've often joked about that, but just the mindset that even in terms of people who have difference of opinions, still very respectful. Years ago when I used to cover the beat in the Capitol when I served in the Assembly, after my first term, I had the honor of being assigned to mentor a few new legislators over the years. And one of the things I always tried to teach them that had been passed on to me was don't ever personalize your differences, because your opponent today may be your ally tomorrow. And so I've tried to live by that, even though some may say, well, you've tried to attack this. No, I've never, in fact, from day one, I've said nothing but good things about the nearly 300,000 strong public servants in this state, whether they're teachers or firefighters or state employees or anybody else out there. I've continued to sing their praises and thank them for their public service. And my sense is people elsewhere around the state respect that, even if they don't agree with every decision I've made.
Polls show, as you're well aware, that you and the bills that you've signed have polarized Wisconsin, divided. It strikes me as, I'm very surprised when only 5% of Wisconsinites don't have an opinion, good or bad, about yourself. If you survived a recall election, will you change the way that you govern, given the division out there, sir? Oh,
I think in the end, when we were able to get through, if the good Lord and the people of the state see fit to elect me again as their governor, just as the majority did last year, I think it's not so much a change of style. I think we'll be able to move on. I mean, I think part of this is driven by the fact that in February and then again in March and all throughout the summer, you had tens of millions of dollars coming into the state, most of which in each of those instances was attacking me. Was attacking not only what we did, but attacking me personally. And I think for many, there's a presumption. I know when I visited schools in the past to read and then meet with teachers, even I take questions, open-ended forum, And oftentimes the second or third question in is usually, why are you attacking teachers? And I'll say, nearly everything I've said or done is somewhere on YouTube. And I always challenge them nicely, but say, go out and you look at YouTube. You'll never find me talking about teachers or public servants in general without saying good things about them. But it's been their union, and in particular some of the money that's coming in from unions outside of the state, that's tried to portray this as an attack. It wasn't an attack. It was about reform. It was about the fact that when we looked at our budget crisis, a crisis similar to nearly every state in this country, think about it. Nearly every governor, Republican and Democrat alike, was faced with the kind of choices we had to make. What did they do in other states? Raise taxes in some, devastating the economy. Laid off thousands of public employees. Would have been bad to lay off anybody, public or private. Cut core services like Medicaid, which we increased, they cut in other states, would have hurt needy families, children, seniors. Or some of those states did accounting gimmicks, but as you know, and a lot of your viewers know, that's been done for years here in the state of Wisconsin, and that's part of the reason why we had a budget deficit. Instead of doing those four, we chose the fifth option, which was true structural reforms that I think will help us not only in the state level, but will help our local governments for generations to come. I think the more people look at it in that context, not in the context of the attack ads, and we saw another example the other day when PolitiFact pointed out how false it was, one of the attack ads that claimed there were 47 kids in a school classroom. There weren't. They couldn't prove it. But I think when people get beyond those attack ads after those elections, we can get back to moving the state forward together.
Well, that was my next question. If you won a recall election, would you look for another 2.5 years of the politics of confronting, and you go to the fishing opener and your protesters are there? Could you see the next 2.5 years playing out the same way as the last?
I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope not. I think people would be aware of that. And I think actually, again, for most people in this state, even those who don't necessarily support my policies, even some who may support a recall, most people are not that confrontational. Most people have an opinion, they express it, but they're not the ones being busted in front of my house. They're not the ones who tried yell us down at the State Fair or at the Beloit Welcome Center, other places like that. They're not the folks doing that, but unfortunately that's what gets the coverage. That's what gets the attention. I think most people in the state, that kind of spirit of the people of Wisconsin is, you can differ. I mean, remember 2000, 2004, we were one of the closest states in the country when it came to the presidential election. So having an electorate that has maybe two different points of view that are strongly felt is not anything new. This is not a state that's been monolithic for years and then suddenly one issue came up and suddenly you've got a division out there. We've been passionate about our beliefs in this state for decades, if not generations. The difference is, though, I think historically, there was that certain level of respect that even if you didn't agree with someone, you respected their opportunity to share their message, and my hope is we can get back to it, because I think that's where most people in the state are.
Well, on that note, why don't you use this interview to speak to the 507,000 people who have signed those recall petition. What's your message to them, sir?
Well, I think to them would be, look at the options. The 5 things I laid out. Which of those would be preferable? Because if you look at what happened in other states, those other options, when invoked this past year, have been rather damning for them. They hurt Illinois, for example, raised taxes dramatically. They still have a budget deficit. In turn, they had to consider laying off thousands of public employees. They had to consider closing state facilities. They have an unemployment rate that's at 10%, even though ours is at 7.3%, which is better than it was a year ago at this time. But they've had some tremendous, tremendous challenges, and things aren't likely to get much better in the future out there. We made long-term structural changes that I believe that, while everybody may not have liked at the time, I think over time people will realize they were better than the alternatives.
If there is a special election on whether you should stay in office, and the candidate is Tom Barrett, what would be the central issue that, or what would be your election themes against Tom Barrett, sir? Well,
I think any candidate out there. I mean, 2 things are going to come true. One, my opponent's really going to be the big money coming from the unions, both within the state, and much of the money we saw earlier this year in the Senate recalls came from outside the state. That's going to be my opponent, not so much the name on a ballot. You see the attack ads. All those attacks are essentially funded by groups that are largely supported by unions. That'll continue. But whether it's the mayor or anybody else, I mean, I think it's a real choice. Elections aren't about the past. More often than not, they're about the future. So people have to decide, do we want to go back We want to go back in time to the days of billion-dollar budget deficits, to double-digit tax increases, and to record job losses, because that's the policies we had before. Lost 150,000 jobs, had one of the largest structural deficits ever, had tax increases several times in the past. That's what we got out of my predecessor. That's what we get out of people like Governor Quinn and others in Illinois, and that's what we're likely to get out of anybody who'd be opponent to me in a recall election. Or do we want to move forward? And that's really the contrast we'll offer.
Do you expect it to be Tom Barrett?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, to me, the idea that somebody might run in a recall election parallel to at the same time they're running for re-election to office as mayor seems to be a little bit odd, but having odd things in this year would not be out of the norm.
When you ran for governor, the most somebody could give to you was $10,000, sir, as you know. Now in this special period, you're getting gifts of up to $250,000, 25 times. How are you going to make sure that that larger money doesn't influence any of your decisions as governor?
Yeah, well, you look at any of the folks who've given it that, Mark, they're people from not only around the state, but around the country. People who don't have any interest in front of the state. They're people who just saw the tens of millions of dollars brought in from outside of Wisconsin in the Senate recall elections, who said, we got to do something to counterbalance that. We got to do something to let me and our allies get our message out. And the interesting thing is, off of that report, this most recent report is, out of all the money that came in, we had about 47,000 donors. That's about the size of the city of Wauwatosa, where I'm from. And of that, 79% were people who gave us $50 or less. So the grassroots is still very much driving our fundraising, because I think the grassroots is behind our effort.
The message of Act 10 and the budget bill you signed, sir, was fixing the deficit and giving local governments the tools to control their salary and fringe benefit costs. If you survive the special election, how do you see the framing issue, the defining issue for the 2013-15 budget, sir?
Oh, I think continuing those reforms and ultimately, I think two things. One, in everything we do, which includes the budget, we want to continue to make it easier for small businesses to create jobs in this state, because my goal, 250,000 jobs, was through 2015. So everything I'm focused on, not just for the next year, but for the next several years, is on that. The other part is, it's not just about balancing the budget, but I think the next quest for us, and it's why collective bargaining reform was so important. See, it's not just balancing the budget. It's ultimately, because of the changes we made, both the state and local governments can now hire and fire. We can staff based on merit. We can pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms and our government positions all across the state. And so in the next budget, what we're really going to be charging every one of our state agencies, every one of our cabinet members, with doing, is ultimately charging them with making what they do, making them do it better. And we do this all the time outside of government. I said there's always a false choice between government saying you either got to raise taxes or cut services. Nowhere else in life do you do it. In business, you don't say, well, I'm going to double the price of my product. People run to your competitor. Nor do you say, I'm going to cut the quality of my product, or people run to your competitor. Instead, they use, whether it's lean manufacturing or Lean Six Sigma or total quality management, they use techniques like that to squeeze more out of what we do, to be more efficient, more effective. And I think now that instead of having grievances and collective bargaining agreements and contracts like that, now we can have supervisors working directly with their employees, with their coworkers, about how to reform the system, make it work better. We could do more of that in the next budget.
If in 6 or 7 months the Senate is controlled by Democrats, would you consider going back on some of the Act 10 changes, just in terms of getting along with a Senate that's run by Democrats, sir?
Well, I think doing that would be selling out local governments. I was there for 8 years. I know they'd be devastated. I mean, Mayor Tom Barrett's a good example. Tom Barrett and his allies back in March said that the reforms we put in place would devastate the city of Milwaukee. On August 8th, the day before the recall election, the comptroller in the city of Milwaukee acknowledged that the reforms for that city alone would save anywhere from $11 to $17 million. If we pulled back on it, whether it's a big city like Milwaukee or it's a small town like Delavan where I grew up or anywhere in between, those cities, those counties, those municipalities, those school districts would be devastated. And so I don't think it's in anyone's interest to fundamentally shift that, or you just shift the burden on the local government, which means either higher property taxes, which none of us want, or means devastating cuts from those local governments. I think long term, the way, no matter who's in charge, the way we focus on moving the state forward and getting support, I think, from both Democrats and Republicans alike, is by focusing on the economy. What I heard when I've been holding listening sessions and hearing particularly from small businesses, has been the fact that from one end of the state to the other, from Milwaukee to Madison, Superior to La Crosse, and all spots in between, small business owners said we need more help getting skilled workers, because right now we've got jobs in many cases, but we don't have enough people with the skills to meet those. We need more help with access to capital to help grow those companies. We need to cut through the red tape. We appreciate not adding more regulations, but we need to cut through the red tape at both the state and the local level. To the extent we can help small businesses grow their jobs by tackling those issues, those are things that aren't highly partisan. Those are things that Democrats and Republicans can work together.
When I go through the Northern Summit that you just had up north, I heard you use a new term, 250,000 new careers. Can I ask you, are you redefining your goal of 250,000 private sector job? Help me understand your term, 250,000 new careers, sir.
I think for that it's just kind of expounding. I mean, our goal is still 250,000 private sector jobs,
yes,
which we believe we can get over time despite all the talk about the last couple months being tough. The reality is, you know, if you got a team with a losing season, you take them over as we were in the last 3 years, losing 150,000 jobs, you're not going to get them all at once. If your goal is, you know, get to the Super Bowl, you try and get your, you know, you try to get to 500, and then you move up to a winning season, and then you aim for the Super Bowl. That's what we're doing with the 250,000 jobs. When I say careers, what I mean is our focus point, we'll take any and all jobs, don't get me wrong. But I think we want family-supporting, career-driven jobs. It's why I've been putting a lot of emphasis on not only finding skilled workers, but of marketing and promoting manufacturing. It's about 19% of the state's economy. It's the largest percentage of any state in the country that's dependent on manufacturing. And increasingly, that's where the new jobs are. It's where the jobs are available, and where, unfortunately, we have a lot of gaps in people being trained and having the skills to take on those jobs. Even though they pay well, they're a much cleaner environment than you or I remember in the past when we were growing up. They're great jobs. In many cases, paying $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 or more per year. Those are careers. Those are things that people don't just go into to bide time. They make a career out of that. And my point is, I'd like to see not just 250,000 more jobs. I'd like to see more jobs like that people can build a career and ultimately a family around.
So you're not moving the goalposts, and
Nope.
you still want to be judged by 250,000 new private sector jobs by 2015.
Yep. I just think the reality is, for the focal point is, it's not just any and all jobs. We have jobs that are available. We have an industry in the state, particularly manufacturing, that likes to grow, that would like to grow, but we've got to make sure that we have people ready for a career that matches those job openings.
On July 1, you're going to get a report on pensions. Let me ask you this. Can state and local governments in Wisconsin afford to continue offering defined benefit pensions to their employees, sir?
Well, that's part of what we're looking at. Although I think it's pretty safe to say that people who are in the pension system right now, we're not looking to fundamentally change that. What we're probably looking at, and we'll let the facts drive it. I don't have a preconceived notion. There's not something I've said, I want this in the report. I said we want a full report, because anytime you look at the potential even for changes in this, you need a full actuarial assessment, so you're not messing around with the system. A system that, I might add, for state employees is 100% funded, unlike, for example, Illinois that's half funded. That's a strength for us here. But if we were to look for, say, for new employees, or look ahead in the future as an option even for existing employees, we'd want to know fully what the impacts were. But I think that's something worth looking at. A lot of small business owners say to us, why do you guys have a traditional pension system? Why don't you have something like a 401k? Our response is, we're looking at it, but we're not going to rush to change just because you do it unless we know what the ramifications are.
Have the protests, the anger, the emotion, and the trauma, has it gotten in the way of the ability of you and your family to enjoy this holiday season?
No, thankfully not. I mean, you know, people, like I say, by and large, are good in this state. They're respectful in the state. You get a handful of nuts out there. But even for the craziness, you know, for the example of the guy that flipped me off when I was raking leaves out in front of my house in Wauwatosa, I laughed. The young man that one of the friends of one of my kids said, how do you handle it? And I said, Dave, if you stay respectful, you stay positive, good things will happen. And a minute or two goes by, and here comes two more cars honking, and both of them with thumbs up. So I said, for every one of those obnoxious examples, there's always plenty more that are really pretty positive. And we remember those this time of year, not just the more strenuous ones.
Well, Governor Scott Walker, thank you, and Christmas greetings to you and the First Lady and your sons.
Same to you and your family, and a happy and prosperous New Year.
Thank you, sir. you.